Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Talking Cardboard. My name is Cory, and this is a continuation of my top 50 favorite board games of all time. With part number 2, I'm going over my games 40 down to 31. Let's get started. Alright, and game number 40 on my list is obviously an excellent game. It is still in my top 50 favorite board games of all time, but it has dropped 16 places since last year's list. Just haven't got it played a lot recently, but still a fantastic game, and this game is Roll Player. Roll Player, a very simple game on the surface. Basically the theme is that you're building out a D&D character sheet by drafting dice. It sounds like it is kind of more of a fantasy D&D style type of game, but it's really not. It's very Euro-y, very puzzly, and kind of abstract, but I really enjoy it. At the beginning of the game, you get these different race and class and attribute cards that you fill your board with, and those will have different configurations of different puzzles you're trying to solve basically throughout the game. During every round, you are drafting one die and then placing it wherever you'd like on your board to best suit your board. You're obviously trying to fill in the board the best you can to get the most points by the end of the game, but you're doing it in so many different ways. You're trying to match up different color dice to different rows on your board. You are trying to get different values added together to be within a certain range of the specific number you're looking for, and all these different little puzzles that make this game really neat, really enjoyable, and different every time we've played it. So if you really enjoy puzzle games and a new challenge every time you sit down, even if you're not really huge on the D&D theme or a high fantasy type theme, that doesn't really come through a ton in this game. It's more so if you like abstract puzzle, trying to figure out different puzzles the best you can, then this game would more appeal to you for those reasons. So give it a shot. It is Roll Player. Okay, and my number 39 is brand new to the list. And this game is Architects of the West Kingdom. Architects of the West Kingdom, again, the lineup of games by Renegade Games, where you've got Raiders of the North Sea and Architects of the West Kingdom and Paladins of the West Kingdom, and those different series of games have just really appealed to me. But Architects does it in a unique way that really sets it above and beyond a lot of those other titles. At its heart, it is a simple worker placement game that you're placing your workers to different spots to basically gather different resources, gather them to build buildings out to get victory points. Whoever's the most points at the end of the game wins, but there are some really neat aspects to this. One of the neat aspects to Architects of the West Kingdom is that when you're placing a worker on a spot, the number of workers of your type of worker that is there is the amount of resources or the amount of actions you get out of that particular worker placement spot. So that's really neat. Another really cool thing that is unique to this game, more so than I don't think any other game has done it quite like this, especially with worker placement, but that is you get to capture and arrest workers off the board and put them in jail. It's really cool. You can arrest your own workers to get them back to your board, so then you get to use them on future turns. You can arrest other players' workers from the board and put them in jail, and for every worker of theirs you turn into jail, you get a coin for. You're getting paid for basically the bounty on their heads, and you're gathering them up, getting them off, and getting paid for that job, and they can't get them out of jail unless they lose some virtue and some coins and really have to pay some debts to get themselves out of jail. So it's just a really neat thing and puts a whole twist and a spin on the generic worker placement that has come to fruition over the last 10 years. And to really be a solid worker placement game, I feel you need one or two things that make it a little bit different, and this game, Architects, definitely does that for me. It makes it unique, it makes it feel different than any other worker placement game in my collection, and that's why it's at number 39. Okay, and my number 38 is a party game that I really enjoy to death. And I know I am a champion for this game because I speak about it all the time. I try to champion it the most I can to try to get the word out to other people for this game. I don't know if others enjoy this game as much as I do. I think everybody has had fun every time they've played it because I don't know, it seems like they're having a good time, but this party game is When I Dream. When I Dream, I've talked about it on a lot of my other videos previously, so I won't go into depth on it too much, but what I really love about the game is that it is a very, very quick game. It doesn't take very long to play at all. It does not overstay its welcome, and it's just a ton of fun while you're playing it. You're basically taking one turn at a time around the table as being a blindfolded person. So you put a blindfold over your head, and you are hearing clues from other players on them trying to get you to guess what the picture is on the card in the middle of the table that you can't see. There are some people trying to give you good clues to try to get you to guess it correctly, and there are other people around the table that are giving you bad clues to try to throw you off and to get you to guess it incorrectly. Depending on what type of player they are, if they're the boogeyman, then they're bad. If they're a fairy, they're good. Depending on what character they are, they get points for either making you guess it correctly or guess it incorrectly. So just that little spin on it all in itself is a lot of fun. It's some people say they feel like they're under a lot of pressure being the blindfolded person because it seems like every guess that you give at the clues people are giving you, you feel like you are getting it incorrect. Like, oh yeah, I'm sure I got that one wrong. Oh, I'm sure I got that one wrong too. But really, you'd be surprised, and everybody is surprised at how many cards they can actually guess correctly. So it is tough for both sides, depending on what character you are. It's not easier being one side versus the other, I don't think at all. So that is When I Dream. Okay, and on to number 37. This is a 2-player only game that has gone up 11 places for me since last year's list. I just really, really love this 2-player game. It's one of my favorite 2-player games I have ever played, and I know I'm not in the minority on this one. I know a lot of other people talk about this one online, but it's just a ton of fun because of the asymmetry and just what's going on, and the theme really doesn't hurt it either. And this game is Raptor. So in Raptor, one person is taking on the role of the scientists, the other player is taking on the role of the velociraptors. You have asymmetric goals that you're trying to accomplish to win the game. The raptors are trying to escape off the board before getting captured. The scientists are trying to capture the raptors before they escape. And there's a whole lot of tension and push and pull in this game, and maneuvering and tactical strategy, and just everything I love in a game. The one unique thing that I'm going to talk about real quickly before moving on to the next game, because this mechanic alone is what makes me love this game so much, is that the card play in this game is unique. Each turn, both sides play one card face down, and you flip them up simultaneously, and depending on what number of the card you flipped up, tells you what actions you can do in a very cool way. So you'll have a deck of cards numbered 1 through 9. Both players have the same deck of cards numbered 1 through 9 with different abilities depending on what side you're on. But if you played the higher number card, you get to take the difference between the two cards and that many basic actions. So if I'm the Velociraptor player and I played an 8, and my opponent, the scientist, plays a 5, the difference between 8 and 5 is 3. So me as the Raptor, I would get 3 basic actions that I could then take on my turn. Vice versa, on the flip side, the scientists, them having the lower card, they don't get any basic actions, but they get the special ability that is listed on that value 5 card. So they don't get any basic actions, but they get that special ability. So trying to outwit your opponent and outguess them on what they're going to play when is really neat, because sometimes you want to play the lower card for the special ability, and other times you want to play the higher card for as many basic actions as you can pull off as possible on that turn to do different things. But it's a quick playing game and a lot of fun every time I've played it, and that is Raptor. Okay, and the next game on my list has actually dropped 22 spots since last year's list, but fantastic game nonetheless. I know I say that about all these games, which is true, but just haven't, there's been so many great new games that have come out that I haven't gotten this one to the table too much over the last year, but this game is Voyages of Marco Polo. Voyages of Marco Polo, a really fun game where you're traveling around the map and doing actions based on what towns or different cities you are visiting. All in the meanwhile, you're accomplishing these different missions and different ways to get points and adventuring around the map by placing dice on the board. So this is a dice worker placement game. Depending on the pip value of the dice you place on the board and how many of those pip value dice you place at different worker placement spots, it gives you different actions. Dice worker placement in games is really a mechanism that I enjoy. Every time I've encountered that mechanism in a game, I've really enjoyed it, but Marco Polo just does it so smoothly, so well. The theme makes sense with what you're doing. You're collecting different resources and camels to allow you to travel around the map, and in Marco Polo fashion, you're trying to discover the most towns and getting you the most efficient actions based on those towns you've discovered better than your opponents. And by the end of the game, whoever's done that the best wins. But I just really, really like the smooth, quick gameplay of taking the dice you've rolled and deciding what to do on which worker placement spots with those dice. So that game is Marco Polo. All right, and my number 35 game has dropped 9 places since last year. A common trend here, but there are a lot of new games to the list that have kind of bumped some of these other games around quite a bit. But this game I actually mentioned a little bit earlier on the list with kind of its newer, younger brother of a game with Architects. This game is Raiders of the North Sea. Raiders of the North Sea is kind of what started this whole channel for me. It was the very first video I ever posted on YouTube. It was of my wife and I playing Raiders of the North Sea with both of its expansions, and we just had a fun time every time we've played it. We fell in love with it right away. We did realize after the first few plays that it was almost a necessity to get at least one or both of the expansions thrown in to really add replayability to the game. It got stale after the first few plays, but really if you add one or even both of those expansions in and you just throw it all in and use it all out of all the boxes and combine it all, it has a ton of replayability and it's never gotten old for me. At higher player counts, the game does run a little bit long, so I do prefer it at 2 or 3 players, but 4 or around the 4 spot gets a little bit long. But playing it with 3 or 2 players is just its sweet spot, and it really sings. What makes this game unique is it is another worker placement game, but you get 2 actions on your turn. You get to place one of your workers on a vacant spot to take an action, and then your other action is taking any other worker off the board that you didn't just place to take that second action. So it's really fun. There's different colored workers that get you different abilities, but you don't have any workers that you quote unquote own or get to use just for yourself. You're placing one off your board onto the main board for that first action, but that second action, you're pulling off a different worker that somebody else had used in a previous round or an earlier turn. So you are all kind of watching what your opponents are doing and seeing where they're placing, so then you could take advantage of, okay, well, I know they just placed this worker here, so I know for sure I can take that as my second action on my next turn if this player doesn't take that from the board, because I can place my worker off my board to a vacant spot and just go ahead and pull that other worker off that they had just used to use that action as my second action. So kind of that push and pull and manipulation of the board with these different workers is what I love most, and that is Raiders of the North Sea. Okay, my number 34 game dropped 9 places. Just like Raiders of the North Sea, this one is staying really tight with it and dropped 9 places as well. But this game is Rajas of the Ganges. Rajas of the Ganges is another dice worker placement game, as mentioned earlier with Marco Polo, but this game does it in a little bit of a different way where you are using these different colored dice not only for the value of the dice, but also for the color on the die as a currency for doing different things around the board. The really fun thing in this game is that all the actions are so cool and so unique. There's a river action where you're going up the river on your boat, and wherever it lands is like a special bonus that you get. There are these different spots that really allow you to manipulate your dice. Like you can turn in 2 green dice to get you a blue die, or if you really needed a red die, you might turn in 2 yellow dice for that, or vice versa. It's really, you're kind of min-maxing and manipulating these dice the best you can to trigger the end game. I never thought I'd say this about a game, but the way that this end game is triggered is almost what makes this game so great. You have 2 tracks that are going in different directions around the board. You've got a currency track and a prestige track, and when those 2 tracks make it all the way around the board and finally overlap one another is when the end game is triggered. But however far you can surpass when those 2 pass each other, when those 2 tracks pass each other, is basically the amount of points you get or how good you did by the end of the game. Whoever triggers the end of the game not necessarily wins the game, because everybody else gets to finish their turns, and if they end up surpassing both of their tracks further than what you had done, then they win. But it's just really fun trying to do these different things, not only on the main board, but you have your own player board as well, where you're buying these tiles that you get to place on your board, and it really feels like you're connecting paths, and it feels like you're exploring these jungles and getting these bonuses based on how well you connect your paths on your board. But you're really just doing all these different things to manipulate one of the 2 tracks. And whether or not you choose to really go heavy in money or heavy in prestige or try to balance both the best you can is up to you. Because wherever they end up overlapping is how the end of the game is triggered. It doesn't matter where they overlap, just as long as they do overlap. So it's a lot of fun choosing your own path and your own way to victory in this game. And that is Rajas of the Ganges. Okay, and my number 33 on the list is my biggest drop, my biggest downfall of the list. It actually dropped 23 places. 23 places. So, and I think this is because I don't really have any of the gamers in my solid gaming group or the people I play with. Most of them don't really enjoy this game as much as I do, so it doesn't hit the table very often, and it's a game that you can't really play very well at 2-player. You really need that full complement of players to get the most you can out of it. So it's just, I think it's dropping and kind of falling a little bit sour to the list here because I don't have really a core game group that enjoys this game as much as I do. As bad as that sounds, there is some reason or there is some effect that it has for me to where it falls on my list, but this game is Kemet. I really, really adore this game. There's combat going on and area control and all these just smooth gameplay mechanisms to get your troops to move. And the combat is so simple, it's very deterministic, which I really enjoy. You just play a card face down and add it to your attack value, and whoever has the most attack value versus the defense wins. So it is deterministic, but it's very simple, very smooth, very easy to understand. I think the complexity in this game really takes place or takes a hold of people when it gets into the tech tree of different creatures and monsters and troops and abilities that you can get, because there is just a ton of different tiles that you can add to your board for these special abilities. So I think a lot of people kind of get lost in the shuffle with that, but if you've played this game a few times and you're very familiar with what each of the tiles do, and kind of get really familiarize yourself and memorize what the different tiles do, this game can really shine. And I know the memorization and the learning and kind of the learning curve to having a solid foundation of knowing what these tiles do is the reason why this game falls flat for so many of my friends. But I really think that I really kind of look past that when I'm playing this game. I'm not much of a gamer where I have to win to have fun. Really, in this game, I enjoy trying to add these special abilities and hire these monsters and all these different technologies to make my army completely different than anybody else's army. That alone is the fun in this game that I have with this game. What happens from there in attacking and area control and getting points and vying for different parts of the land, yeah, that's all great, and that's a huge part of the game. I mean, that's how you win. But really, I think the building and making my army unique and trying to do the best I can with what technologies I've randomly thrown together to see what would happen this time, I think is the reason why I enjoy this game so much. So I could be kind of an oddball or kind of the odd one out in thinking that, but I just really enjoy that part of the game every time. So that is Kemet. Okay, and my number 32 game is just a fantastic, fantastic two-player card game. It's only dropped one spot on my list, so it's pretty much holding steady to my list throughout the year. And it's a pretty old game. It's kind of an older game at this point, but it's still holding strong in the same spot on my list. And like I said in previous videos, that is an attest to a good game, where you can throw this game aside for a year or two, haven't touched it once, and then as soon as you bring it out, you just fall in love with it all over again, and you realize why that game has been so great to you and why it's been in your collection for so long. And this game gives me that feeling. It is Star Realms. Star Realms, just a fantastic back and forth game. Each player starts with 50 life points, and the first player to get the other one down to 0 wins. So it is attacking back and forth. But the way you're doing it is really fun. This game is just kind of a really generic, basic deck building game, but where you're buying spaceship cards and base cards and adding them to your discard pile, shuffling them into your deck and drawing them to use them on future turns. That sort of thing. You've heard it all before. It's been around for many, many years at this point. But what makes Star Realms so unique and so fun is that there's 4 different factions that you're vying to take control over in this game. And each faction really does something unique and completely different than any of the other factions. So the better you can exploit 1 or 2 of the factions and really combo off of those factions better than your opponent, you can really jump light years ahead of them in what you're doing. So like I said, the factions can trigger off of one another and can really combo off of one another. So if you play a card from a specific faction down for its ability, and it has maybe a secondary ability on the bottom that you get to then trigger if you play another card of that same faction, well, if you have more of that same faction in your hand, you can play those down and really benefit from not only from its A ability, but its B ability on the card as well. And if you're doing that with multiple cards where you're triggering its A and B, A and B, A and B on all your cards, you are getting just these ton of factions, and it can create for a very explosive turn, and that is the most fun in this. You also have bases that you can play down on the table, and a base card stays in front of you and doesn't get shuffled back into your discard pile or back into your deck until after it's destroyed. And those base cards you have to get through. If your opponent has one on the table, you have to get through those before you can hurt their life points. So that's really cool to have that protection on the board as well. But just balancing those factions in your deck with getting bases to protect you, all in the meanwhile to slow down your opponent, and just that back and forth struggle to do better than what combos you're seeing your opponent pull off is the fun in this game. So definitely worth a try. Still in the year 2021, a fantastic game and a very cheap price point. So I suggest you go out and try it. Okay, and finally, my number 31 game actually went up 3 spots from last year, and this game is Azul Summer Pavilion. Yes, Azul, a fantastic, fantastic tile-laying game. I do enjoy Summer Pavilion. Its 3rd iteration, better than the first 2, but I would highly recommend that first version of the game as well. I think Summer Pavilion just kind of etches it out a little bit better for me because of one minor thing that I'll detail a little bit later here. But in Azul Summer Pavilion, you are drafting these colored tiles from the center of the board to place on your board. The better you can place the tiles on your player board, the more points you will score. So like I said, you've got these markets in the middle of the board that have tiles on it. On your turn, you can simply grab all of one color off of one of the markets, and the rest of the tiles of other colors go into the center of the board that can then be for other players to grab in future turns. Those tiles that you're grabbing, you will eventually place on your own player board, but in Summer Pavilion, you're doing it in a more strategic way than in other versions of Azul, where you're trying to spend a number of tiles to fill in these spots in ways that you're surrounding different statues and fill in different gaps on your board, because if you can do that really well, you get bonus tiles that you can grab from the bonus tile board to then add to your board. And like I said earlier, there's really only one thing that sets Summer Pavilion apart from the other games. I mean, surrounding statues is unique to this as well, which is a lot of fun, but really the thing that sets this apart is that there's a set number of rounds in Summer Pavilion. Really that set number of rounds and having the ability to have wild colored tiles and surrounding statues, kind of giving you more of an option for your strategy in this, is really what sets Summer Pavilion apart from its other versions of the games. But yeah, I mean, really any version of Azul is perfectly fine and they're all great, but Summer Pavilion just kind of etches out the other two for me at this moment in time. So that's Azul Summer Pavilion. All right, everybody, and that does it for my part 2 of my top 50 favorite board games of all time. I hope you enjoyed today's list, and as always, if you have comments of other games that are your favorite games of all time, leave them in the comment section below. I would love to hear what are some of your favorite games. Also, if you like the content you see here on the channel, please consider subscribing. We do always appreciate that. And like I said in the other video, John from Talking Cardboard is doing his top 30 favorite games of all time in a series of videos as well, so make sure you hop on over to his videos and check those out as well to see how his list differs from my list. So until next time, you all have a great day.